Okay, so thud compression. So this one is pretty. I had to do some different stuff to the settings. I fiddled with the release time a bit, and I brought the threshold down pretty low because really what we're doing is we're letting the attack through. So in order to compress the decay, you kind of have to bring the threshold down to where the decay is, if that makes any sense. And I have I mean, this one's the exaggerated one, so the ratio is 11-1, which is ridiculous. And I really would not, I don't think I've ever used compression like this on a kick drum, but just to kind of demonstrate, you can hear the wet and dry, and honestly I think the kick drum sounds better in this case without the compression, but maybe you want a kick drum to sound kind of tiny, because maybe, I don't know, like maybe you want to juxtapose it with an uncompressed kick drum, or like if you want to juxtapose, if you have a beginning of a song that's kind of chilling, or a verse, maybe you want to make the kick drum sound tighter and smaller, you know, maybe you got a kick drum that was tracked really well, or maybe they tracked it with a lot of compression, maybe that studio had some like really, you know, nice. Maybe he had like an 1176, and the engineer got excited and he wanted to use it. And so he used boom compression. You got this thing that was already sounded huge, but like now it sounds huge in the verse and the chorus, and you want to chill it out a bit. So maybe this is what you do. You kind of recompress it the opposite way, and you let, as you can see, it's a slower attack time. It's 51 milliseconds, and so the attack is going to get through, and then it's going to compress the decay, which is effectively what a gate does. I would really probably just use a gate for that, but just so you can see with compression, listen for the attack and listen for the decay. You're not going to hear as much of a difference with the attack. What you're going to hear though is it's going to sound less bright, because the decay on this kick drum is bright. I think because of the way they're modeling it to like sound like it got played obviously in the same room as a snare drum, because most drum kits have a snare drum, and so the decay, you know, right away, right after that, the beater hits the kick drum, it starts to decay immediately, and the initial decay on this kick drum is pretty bright. So when I start bringing that when that gets down, that's brought down, it sounds just not only tighter because there's less decay, but it doesn't sound as bright. So you can also listen for the different parts of drums have different sort of like EQ patterns, if you will, like frequency patterns that get affected when one part is louder than the other. It's an odd, not to use this word twice in the same video, but it's a psychoacoustic effect. It sounds dark, like not, I don't want to say darker, but it doesn't sound as bright. It doesn't sound like it has as much high end on it, because the decay is higher and you're bringing that decay down. So this is an interesting way to kind of maybe affect a kick drum to kind of, it'll still punch through the mix, but it won't take up as much as the high end, and maybe you don't want to kick with that much high end. Maybe you just kind of want it there, punching through, but not really, I don't know. Listen to how the kick sounds a little bit less bright when I put the compression on. So we're going to listen to the dry signal first, and then we're going to turn on the wet signal. Listen for the attack and listen for the decay. I'm not going to pause it and then you listen to the decay. Just listen for both. I'll do a longer wet and dry A-B thing. Listen for the attack, listen for the decay, just listen to what the compression is doing to the kick drum. Listen to what's happening sonically, like frequency-wise, so with the EQ, it kind of sounds like, you know, whether it sounds brighter or darker, and listen for the decay, listen for the attack, and just kind of imagine what the kick drum would sound like in a track, maybe. Just listen for it. Okay, so you can kind of hear the difference. And I want to say, I was just thinking about this. One of the ways I might use this kind of compression setting is in a multi-band compressor where it's divided among the frequency spectrum, and say a metal song with a lot of double bass, really fast kick drums. If you do boom compression on that, it's going to get muddy really fast. you kind of have to have a really tight kick drum, but you don't want to lose that bottom end. So what you might do is compress the low end of the kick drum, so maybe 100 hertz down, to be like this, and then compress the high end a little differently. So you can make it effectively a tighter kick that still has that sub. It's just that the sub gets squashed quickly, so it doesn't get muddy. That, you know, you want to make sure that the decay, it finishes decaying before the next kick drum hits. That's kind of big. That's something I like to focus on, especially if I'm mixing, say, like a metal track with lots of double bass. You want that tight sound, but you also want it to sound big, and you want it to sound powerful and intense. So, you know, maybe using this on the low end on a multi-band compressor, where it's just compressing different, the low end, the mids, the highs, you know, the presence, stuff like that. You can compress it all differently with different attack and release times. And maybe on the low end, you really want I mean, generally on low end, you want a slower attack, because you don't want to. Low end is really dangerous, especially if you don't have good monitoring and you're not in like a really nice studio. You can't hear a lot of what's going on. So I mean, I know my KRKs don't go below 45 supposedly. So I generally mix low end on between with also I also use my AT2020 headphones because they have sub, but you got to make sure that in a room that you're not gonna get a bunch of standing waves and stuff like that. You don't want the low end ringing. You want it there, but you don't want it ringing. You don't want it sounding messy and sloppy. So you don't want to boost the decay, the low decay. So on a multi-band compressor, this is important. Understanding that you don't want to be boosting. You want to boost on a kick drum. Say if you want it to punch you in the chest, you want to put a slow attack time on it, because you don't want it to. You know, maybe like on like a 909 or an 808, this is a different story. But with a rock or metal kick drum, where you want it to hit you still, but you don't want it to sound messy, you'd want a slower attack time. Anyway, so now that you've listened to the difference, and I'll quickly do it again before we move on to the next insert, which is more subtle. Just keep that in mind, the different ways that you could possibly use this compression setting on a kick drum. All right, so quickly I'll do it back and forth again. Okay, so now you can hear that. We're going to move on to the next one, which is just more subtle. I still have pretty similar attack and release times. It's just the ratios, instead of being 11 to 1, it's like 2.43 to 1. And I chilled out the threshold a little bit too. So just listen. So you can kind of hear what's happening. And you can, it's a pretty useful tool to just exaggerate stuff first. That's really what I'm trying to point out, is exaggerate it first, understand what it's doing, set your attack and release times, and then start chilling out the compressor. Start lowering the threshold, start raising the threshold, start lowering the ratio until it's subtle, but it's still there. You'll still be able to hear it. And don't forget, generally in a mix, you're compressing stuff a lot. On a typical mix for me, if I say I'll compress the kick, and then I'll compress the kick snare bus, and then I'll compress the drum bus, and then I'll compress again on my stereo bus, my master, and then I'll limit it. So it's getting compressed like 4 or 5 times typically in a mix. That's a lot of compression. That's going to add up. So you don't want compression to be ridiculous right from the get-go. You want it to be pretty subtle, but you'll notice it. I swear to God, you'll notice a difference slowly. But you got to start by listening for it. It's compression's like a little trick. You really have to listen and practice listening for it. A lot of people say if you don't know how to compress, don't compress. I think that's bullshit. Just don't compress. If you don't know how to compress, don't use it on a mix, especially if you're like getting paid for it or something. If someone else's mix, maybe use it on your own mix. Try it out. But I like to practice it first on, say, a kick drum. If I didn't know how to compress, I would do this technique, and I'd have an idea of how it's going to affect my kick drum, and then I'd actually try to, compress it in a way that will be suitable for my mix. So, practice compression. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, like my page on Facebook. All the links are probably below. And I'll catch you guys later. We'll talk about some other stuff, maybe EQ, parallel processing. Any requests you have for videos, just comment them below, or send me a message or something. I'd love to accommodate. Yeah, have a good one, guys.